It's Friday, June 27th, 2025, and welcome to this Make It Make Sense bonus episode. I'm Grant Herm. So you're getting a bonus episode because there was a major ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court today on its last day of the spring term. The Supreme Court has spring and fall terms. In all, there were 6 big rulings today, and you'll see and hear about a lot of them, but the one that you're going to hear the most about is the one that looks like it's going to be reshaping how we've understood how federal courts and certain kinds of federal laws have worked for the last 50 plus years. The case is called Trump v. CASA, and CASA is an immigrants' rights group that sued Trump over his executive order that would end birthright citizenship. And a little context here, birthright citizenship in the U.S. means exactly what it sounds like. If you're born here or in a U.S. territory to American parents, you're a citizen. It's from the 14th Amendment, which was put in place after the Civil War to give citizenship to the children of slaves so they couldn't be deported to countries that they weren't from after the South lost the war. And then in 1898, there was a landmark case called the U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark, which, if you're a longtime listener, you've heard guests like Liz Dye or Andrew Torres from the Law and Chaos podcast talk about this on the show before. What that ruling said was that the 14th Amendment doesn't only apply to the children of slaves, but all immigrants, essentially saying if you're born here on U.S. soil, you're an American, because the actual wording of it is all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. And it's that section of the 14th Amendment, the subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that Trump and people like Stephen Miller say actually means that birthright citizenship isn't a real thing, at least not for immigrants. Now, this ruling from the Supreme Court today doesn't undo that. In fact, the majority opinion from the court, which is a ruling, that's how you say it in Supreme Court speak, they go out of their way, these 6 conservative justices, to say that this isn't a decision about whether Trump's order on birthright citizenship to end it is unconstitutional. Because what they actually did went further. What this ruling said is that the federal courts, who said that by law Trump wasn't able to get around the 14th Amendment, issued what are known as universal injunctions or nationwide injunctions, meaning if a judge in Texas says that the federal government is doing something illegal or it can't do what it's trying to do, then they can issue this nationwide injunction that stops the government from doing that thing in other states too, so that we are not playing whack-a-mole with the same issue over and over again in every state or every federal court district. Here's what Justice Amy Coney Barrett said, though, writing the majority opinion for this case. Quote, "Some say that the universal injunction gives the judiciary a powerful tool to check the executive branch. But federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to." So what she's saying here is that these lower federal courts overstep the bounds that were put in place for them by Congress when they were created by Congress, because Congress creates the federal courts by writing the laws that create them. That's how that works. And while that's a really, really narrow way to look at this, Barrett is ignoring that these federal courts are often taking up these cases that will have national implications. What the ruling does is basically say that the rulings of federal courts now only apply to people directly in that court's district, or, depending on how narrow you want to look, at just the people in those cases, regardless of whether that same thing, the reason that those cases are in court in the first place, is happening across the country because of a policy of the federal government. It's why liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, her disagreement with this opinion, said this: "The court's decision is nothing less than an open invitation for the government to bypass the Constitution until the day that every affected person manages to become party to a lawsuit and secures for himself injunctive relief. The government may act lawlessly indefinitely." Not even a decision from this court, the Supreme Court, would necessarily bind the government to stop completely and permanently its commission of unquestionably unconstitutional conduct. And now, she also read this entire thing, which is long. There's a lot more than what I just read to you. And it took her more than 20 minutes to read, which in Supreme Court manners is a way for her to show just how angry she is about this ruling. And honestly, she has a point, because what this sets up is a future where we could have a patchwork quilt of federal policies or even federal laws and how they're enforced, where someone in Massachusetts, where one of these birthright citizenship cases is from, can be born a U.S. citizen there, but not a person in, say, Connecticut, just next door. And that would extend to every policy brought before a court in any district on any topic. It massively complicates things like interstate trade and how that might work going forward if there's a dispute, how things like telehealth care might work, how traveling between states for a vacation might even work. And beyond that, it could go as far as Sotomayor says, where if these cases boil down to just the single individuals in these cases, then every person in the country would have to find a way to get a lawyer to sue the federal government, which is hard and expensive, get that through the court system, which takes a long time, and then get a ruling in their favor, which isn't guaranteed. I mean, President Trump was just talking about the complicatedness of having to have everyone go through the court system just a few weeks ago, except for he was talking about all the people that are afforded due process under the law that he wants to deport. Now, before I go further, I do want to say that both parties, at one time or another, have pushed to end nationwide injunctions by law. It's just sort of dependent on whoever was in power in that moment. All of the stuff that conservatives hated about what Biden did on things like student loans, immigration, or trans rights were then blocked by nationwide injunctions from judges. So the thing that they're cheering now, they were angry about before, and that goes the other way too. Now, there is a pro to the list of cons that I've laid out here from this ruling, and that's that it looks like it would put an end to what's known as judge shopping, which means someone brings a case to a federal court that they know will be friendly to their cause, and the court accepts that as long as the person bringing the lawsuit or whatever it is can make a credible claim that they have a local connection to the district or state where that federal court is. It's why conservatives have flocked to the Northern District of Texas, where a judge there has ruled in favor on some of the most extreme anti-abortion arguments, or why Trump filed his lawsuit against the former special prosecutor Jack Smith in Florida instead of in D.C., where the FBI actually is, because he appointed the judge in Florida. Now, likewise, a lot of nationwide injunctions that have been put in place against what Trump has been trying to do on immigration, tariffs, firing public employees, or even ending funding have been done by just a handful of liberal-leaning judges, although I think it's important to say, too, that he has lost in conservative courts more than 80% of the time, according to the nonprofit group Democracy Docket, so take that for what it's worth. And also, as a side note, the whole reason that people like Senator Mitch McConnell, the former Republican Senate leader who is still a power broker in the halls of the Senate, spent his life getting many conservative judges to the federal courts while blocking as many liberal ones as he could, was because he wanted to be able to judge shop. So this ruling, despite how excited Republicans are acting right now, does undermine a lot of that project. Well, kind of, I suppose, but the rest of that gets a little too complicated for a bonus episode. But all of that is honestly small potatoes compared to the consequences that I laid out earlier. And then one more thing. It concentrates the power of the federal government in the hands of the president way more than it's already been happening, and not just under Trump. For decades now, political scientists have been warning about Congress and the courts giving away little bits and pieces of their power to the president and to the office of the president, throwing off our balance of checks and balances. And while in the past, and I guess up until now, presidents who have tried to push beyond their bounds using those little bits and pieces they've been given, they were almost always bound by the law and these nationwide rulings. But now, all bets are off. So if a president really wants to take their power to the extreme edge of their policy, they can do it. And if a court tells them no, well, then they can just pick up stakes and do it somewhere else differently, or continue doing it in a different place until someone there tells them no. And Trump is definitely that president. He's shown us that, especially with a Congress who has shown that it's unwilling to act when the president steps on their constitutional powers. So you've got the court and the Congress giving up their power to the deference of a single guy. Now, before I end this, there are ways that the court left open for broader challenges to government actions, and a big one is class action lawsuits. 2 of them have already been filed, including one from the ACLU that was just filed today in New Hampshire, which says that Trump's order to end birthright citizenship is, quote, illegal. The Constitution and Congress, not President Trump, dictate who is entitled to full membership in American society. And coming back full circle, that question of birthright citizenship is still on the table here. Likely Trump will be moving forward with attempting to enforce his executive order to end birthright citizenship in states and places where courts haven't said that it's unconstitutional because there's no nationwide injunction, unless the Supreme Court issues one. And the Supreme Court is expected to make a ruling on whether the 14th Amendment, as we've understood it for the last 150 or so years, is constitutional coming up in October. Meaning, if you thought the last 5 months of this administration were hectic, we were in for a hell of a summer. All right, that's it for this bonus episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Grant Herms, and I will talk to you next week.